You've already learned about the hardware, operating systems, and software layers of the computer architecture model. Now it's time to learn about the most important layer, the user layer. Troubleshooting problems and solid communication with users may be one of the most challenging parts of your job as an IT support specialist. But by the end of this module, you'll know the best way to handle them. Fixing problems and creating positive interactions with people are two fundamental skills that can be applied to almost any situation in the IT world and beyond.
Bye, Wendy.
Knowing how to analyze an issue, identifying the causes and effects, and use the information to find potential solutions are skills that everyone from IT support specialists to doctors can use. Hi, I'm Marty Clark, and I'm a manager with Google's internal IT support program. Even though I grew up around technology and worked at my university's help desk, going into tech wasn't something that was encouraged by my teachers or my family. Now, as a manager, I try to encourage all techs I work with to follow their passion. It's this passion to help others grow and my love for technology that led me here. Helping people with technology is both a rewarding and challenging endeavor. I encourage my team to take advantage of their work with users to spin up ideas, solutions, and opportunities for improvement. The technical aspects of problem solving are super useful, but don't forget the real reason most technology exists is to improve people's lives. Whether it's the routing algorithm that formed the backbone of the internet or the software tools that let people create amazing art, the ways that people interact with technology are central to IT. As an IT support specialist, you're uniquely positioned to combine technology and people know-how to make those interactions better and make a difference in people's day-to-day lives. How would you respond if I asked you, do you know how long it'll take me to get to the bank? You'd probably ask, where are you? Where's the bank? Are you walking, driving, biking? But if you just guessed the details of my situation to direct me to the bank, your response would be a day late and $1 short. It seems like such a natural thing to ask questions and gather information to solve a problem, but it's usually one of those most overlooked steps in troubleshooting. Troubleshooting is the ability to diagnose and resolve a problem. One of the most difficult skills to acquire in an IT role isn't technical knowledge, but effective troubleshooting, whether that's helping someone face-to-face or remotely. It's not specific to the IT world either. We use troubleshooting skills every day. My car is broken. The light bulb went out. I feel sick. Imagine if you went to your doctor and said, I feel sick, and without any other information, he gives you a prescription for allergy medicine. Time to find a new doctor. While this might seem far-fetched, this can happen pretty often in the IT world. We're so in the habit of fixing things that sometimes we try to fix something without diagnosing it first. We're going to give you the tools you need to develop good troubleshooting habits. No matter how big or small the problem is, the first thing to do in troubleshooting is ask questions. There are a lot of factors that can cause a problem. You want to make sure you gather all your data before you start to tinker with it. Over the next several videos, we're going to demonstrate real-world, in-person, and remote troubleshooting scenarios. For the in-person scenarios, you'll meet Gail and Marty. And yes, we have another Marty joining us. But he spells his name with a Y, and I spell mine with an I. Confusing, I know. Please keep in mind these are not professional actors. We want to give you the opportunity to see how these different scenarios would play out in real-world settings. Let's look at a quick scenario of a not-so-awesome troubleshooting interaction and an awesome one.
My computer's broken.
Ooh, this looks bad. I think you're going to need a new computer. It's going to be about $1,000.
My computer's broken.
Ooh. Okay. Can you tell me a little bit more about how it's broken? Does it turn on at all? Has there been any damage to it lately that you know of?
Well, when I hit the power button, I hear a ding, but nothing comes up on screen.
Oh, okay. Can I take a look?
Sure.
Okay. Let me just see what's going on here. Ah, you know what? The brightness was turned down. These brightness buttons are a little bit fiddly, and it's easy to hit them by accident. So there you are.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
If we didn't ask follow-up questions, we wouldn't have realized the issue was something as small as the screen being dim. So it's important that you're able to gather enough information to start troubleshooting an issue, whether it's big or small. With a little digging, we were able to understand the situation and effectively troubleshoot the issue. What's also really important to call out from this scenario is the tech didn't make the user feel silly for not realizing the screen's brightness was down. Can you think about a time someone made you feel silly or even dumb? It's a pretty terrible feeling. So don't be that person that does it to someone else. Remember, IT support is about working in the service of others. Always try to create a positive experience for the user. We'll deep dive into customer service later on. In the meantime, I'll see you back in the next video on isolating the problem. Now that we have the ask questions approach nailed down, let's cover another effective troubleshooting method, isolating the problem. The goal of this method is to shrink the scope of the potential issue. Let's start with a simple game. I have a number I'm thinking of that's less than 100. Can you figure out what it is? You have 5 questions you can ask me. As you might have guessed, just guessing a number isn't the way to go. Is it 5? No. Is it 7? No. Your odds of figuring it out this way are super low. Instead, you should be shrinking the scope of where the number could be. So you could ask, is it greater than 50? No. Okay, so we know the number is 50 or less. We've just isolated our problem and cut down half of the answers we started with. To narrow the scope further, you could ask, is it greater than 25? Yes. Is it greater than 38? Yes. Is it lower than 45? Yes. Is the number 42? Yes, the number is 42. Nice work. The power of isolating a problem can quickly and effectively help you figure out where the issue lies. The isolate the problem method is meant to shrink the scope of your problem so that you know you're looking in the right area. After you continually isolate the problem, you'll eventually end up at the root cause. Root cause is the main factor that's causing a range of issues. Finding root cause is a critical concept in IT support because it means that you're able to prevent an issue from happening again and again to multiple users. Sometimes the root cause can be difficult to find and extremely obscure. Don't give up if it isn't immediately obvious. Discovering root cause may be tedious, but it's well worth the effort. Now let's take a look at a not so good and a good example of isolating the problem.
Hi, Marty. I can't get my email to work on my laptop.
Hi, Gail. I'd be happy to help with that. Somebody came in the other day with the same problem. Let's uninstall and reinstall the application.
It still doesn't work. Hey, Marty. I can't get my email to work on my laptop.
Oh, hey, Gail. Sure. I'd love to take a look at that. Have you tried checking your mail on your phone or tablet or something like that?
No, it doesn't look like that's working either.
Ooh, let me try. Wow, I can't get in either. Let me look into this for a sec. It appears that the email server is down. The notice says that it's going to be down for about another hour. How about we wait an hour, try again, and if you're still having a problem, we can dig deeper.
Okay. Thanks, Marty.
You're welcome, Gail.
As you can see, it's vital to use the isolating the problem method to decrease the scope of the issue. If you can rule out a problem area to look at, you can troubleshoot more efficiently. Another effective troubleshooting method is called follow the cookie crumbs. What purpose does this serve besides making me want to devour a cookie? Well, this method requires you to go back when the problem first started and work forward from there. You'd be surprised how much information you can learn from asking, when did this problem start?
Can you help me with my phone? My Fun Cat app stopped working.
Sure. Now, what do you mean by stopped working?
Well, when I tap on the app, it starts to load and then it crashes.
Well, take a look here. Okay, let's try reinstalling the app and see if that helps.
It still crashes. I need my Fun Cat app. Can you help me with my phone? My Fun Cat app stopped working.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Can you tell me a little bit more about how it stopped working?
Well, when I tap on the app, it starts and it just crashes.
Ooh, that's not good. When did it start? Have you changed anything since that time?
Well, it worked last night, and I was playing around with it until it started to update, and this morning it just didn't work.
You know, it might have something to do with the update. Let me take a look into it. Okay, looks like there was a bug in the update. We can roll back to an earlier version and see if that helps.
Oh, Cuddly and Peanut, I missed you.
The user can give you information about what they remember, but the systems you work with can also offer insightful information. In the earlier lessons about operating systems, we talked about logs. Remember that logs are like your system's diary. They keep information about dates and events that happened on the system. You can dig through logs at the exact time that a failure happened, and you may find some defining events that could have caused your issue. We'll get into logs in more detail in another course. Error messages are super helpful indicators that can point you in the right direction. Lots of times, a single error will be lost in a sea of errors. It's best to start from the very first error, which may be causing a cascade of errors. By fixing the root error, you'll correct all the other ones in the process. Some errors don't require extra digging, like a 404 not found error you might see on websites that have been moved or deleted, or a permission denied error when accessing a protected file. Let's take a look at this log. I see an error message here at the bottom. Do you think it makes sense to try and figure out this error message and resolve it? You might find yourself spending all day trying to fix these little holes. Let's backtrack up the log a bit instead. Oh, look, we can see where an error first occurred. Let's try to fix this. And now our system isn't yelling at us anymore. We've asked some great questions to understand our problem. We've isolated our problem to an effective area and looked at our cookie crumbs. Now it's time to start fixing the issue. In the IT world, as in life, problems don't always have one right answer. When you troubleshoot an issue, you're essentially trying to isolate it to the root cause. To help you isolate an issue, you need to try some remediation steps. If they don't work, then you can rule those out as the cause. So what's next? Here's where the start with the quickest step first method comes into play. We want to get to our root cause effectively, but sometimes there are multiple options we can use to isolate something. So how do we know which option to try first? It's pretty simple. Try whatever's fastest first.
I'm having a really weird issue with my software. When I start it, it doesn't do anything, and I just installed it.
Interesting. You know, it might have gotten corrupted during installation. Let's reinstall it again.
It still does the same thing. I'm having a really weird issue with my software. When I start it, it doesn't do anything. And I just installed it.
Do you happen to remember if you restarted the computer when you installed it?
Oh, it works now.
It's possible that in this scenario, a software reinstall could fix the issue. It's also possible that a restart was the solution. Since you can test a restart faster than a reinstall, you should test the restart first. You want to be able to troubleshoot and resolve issues effectively and efficiently. So remember to start with the quickest step first. Your time and your user's time are important. You've gained a lot of great foundational troubleshooting skills, but there are some common pitfalls that you should try to avoid in order to be at the top of your troubleshooting game. As an IT support specialist, you'll sometimes encounter the same issue over and over again. Before the next issue comes in, you may find yourself using your muscle memory to fix the issue. Pitfall number 1, going into autopilot. Make sure you don't default to autopilot mode, moving through issues out of habit and without careful thought. More often than not, there are small variables that change the problem you're seeing entirely. Ask questions and gather data so you can fully understand an issue. This takes less time than having to redo some sloppy work you did in autopilot mode. Pitfall number 2, not finding the root cause. It's very easy to get distracted by small problems that pop up, but it's super important to remember there's probably a very big problem causing all these small problems. Spend a little extra time investigating the issue instead of trying to fix all the small holes. If you're trying to do a quick fix, it's tempting to wipe a system and start from scratch. This approach is kind of like using a hammer when a surgical scalpel might be a more appropriate tool. Let's say a user isn't able to access a particular website. Re-imaging the system isn't a great solve. It doesn't get to the root cause, and it doesn't help further your own knowledge. Investigating the problem a bit, testing out possible issues and solutions incrementally, and identifying the root cause can end up saving a lot of time and effort in the end, and it feels really empowering as an IT support specialist. And with that, you'll be able to go out in the real world and use your new skills to methodically troubleshoot an issue. Customer service is a critical skill in IT support. I can't emphasize that enough. You can have all the technical knowledge in the world, but if the user had a poor experience in the process of getting their issue solved, you failed. The techniques we'll discuss in these videos won't only help you with your users. They'll help you work better with your peers, your managers, and maybe even your own personal relationships. Keep in mind, these techniques don't work in all situations. The reality is that no matter how great you are at customer service, some situations don't have a good resolution. Plus, everyone is different, so you'll need to tweak your style when working with users. But the techniques we'll cover are intended to make your IT interactions more successful. In IT support, you work with users to fix technology and improve how people use it. To accomplish this, you need to develop a trust between you and the user. Lots of employers believe that good customer service also builds brand loyalty, which is a key to success. These lessons are meant to give you the foundational skills and techniques of how to deliver great customer service. Customer service practices can differ from company to company, so while we'll cover the key concepts of customer service in any IT support role, it's important to talk with your employer to understand the company's customer service approach. This will also give you an idea of how much freedom or restrictions you might have in the role. Spoiler alert, great customer service requires exhibiting empathy, being conscious of your tone, acknowledging the person you're talking to, and developing trust with the user. If you remember nothing else from this lesson, remember those 4 things. The most important of all of these is empathy. What's the difference between sympathy and empathy? People will say things like, sympathy is saying you're sorry, empathy is feeling sorry. That doesn't really explain it. So let's use an example to drive this home. If someone fell into a dark, damp, dirty hole, and you leaned over with a sad expression and said, "That must be a really tough situation," then you're expressing sympathy. You're sharing their feelings, but you aren't experiencing those feelings. If you crawled down into that dark, damp, dirty hole with the person who fell and said, "This is a really tough situation," then you're expressing empathy. You're able to see something from someone else's perspective and understand their feelings. The word choice between the two situations is very similar, but the action you take by looking at it from their perspective is what empathy is all about. Some days it's hard to empathize. I know from experience. Maybe you had an argument with a loved one before work. Then by the end of the day, you find yourself getting annoyed or upset with users. That's the moment when empathy becomes the most important, because anyone can showcase empathy when it's easy, but someone who persistently displays empathy will stand out as a kinder human and a more professional and effective employee. Once you have empathy down, you should think of your tone. Tone is historically thought of as how you speak out loud. In this technological age, when many of our interactions are over text and IT support is increasingly done remotely, tone isn't just about how you come off during an in-person conversation. It's expanded into how you write, punctuate, and even spell. If your tone is short or blunt, then the user will feel brushed off and devalued. But if your tone is friendly and curious, the user is much more likely to have a positive experience working with you. Be careful not to go overboard with the friendliness, though. It could be disingenuous. Communicating a good tone is a delicate balance. How you ask a question and how you respond to a user's question matters. Let's say you tell a user in an email, "Turn your computer off and on again and it will start working." They'll probably never respond, and your company may have lost a customer because the tone is just too short and pretty unfriendly. While it gets to the point, it doesn't leave the door open to a conversation. What if instead you wrote, "Please try turning your computer off and back on again. This should update the change we made and fix the problem. If that doesn't work, just let me know." It's a little wordier, but it has a better tone of asking versus telling. Inviting them back to connect with you in case the issue isn't resolved leaves the lines of communication open. Tone can be especially difficult when you're supporting someone in a different region or country. Make sure to familiarize yourself with the local style, whether that's more conversational or direct, and adjust your style depending on the audience. In this day and age of text and email, it's easy to ignore what someone says. If a comment seems like a dig or it's just too much information provided, we tend to shy away from responding. It's also really common to forget to tell the user what you're doing while you're troubleshooting. That might leave the user waiting in an awkward silence. Whenever possible, acknowledge the user. This reduces the tension that might build and helps you understand how you're working toward a solution. Let's say you're chatting back and forth with a user. You're asking a lot of questions to better troubleshoot the issue. The user is answering them, but also makes comments like, "Geez, I already answered these in my last email," or "I just want to know what's causing my problem." You choose to ignore this and continue on with your troubleshooting. You think you're close to solving the problem, and these side comments are just a distraction. But then the user stops fully engaging with you and only gives you half answers to your questions. Now you're not able to solve the issue at all. The user's unhappy, you're unhappy, and the company's unhappy. It's a bad situation. Instead of ignoring the user in that situation, you could have said, "I'm sorry for asking these questions. Sometimes repeating them will help new information pop up." Or you could have said, "Sorry for the repeat questions. I don't want to give you a superficial cause when we could fix the root issue and you won't have to chat with us again." This helps them to understand your method and become part of the solution. It's important to acknowledge your own actions if you think they might otherwise confuse the user. Let's say a user contacts you to fix something. After collecting some information, you go radio silent. What's the user to do? Would they ask if you're still there? Would they wait awkwardly until you came back on the line? How long would they wait before ending the call or saying something? How would they feel about their interaction with you? Pretty awkward. But what if you said, "I need to do some research on this issue. Would you mind waiting about 5 minutes or less while I do that?" They'd probably say sure and keep themselves occupied while they wait. They'd also feel more confident in your ability to resolve the issue. This leads to the most important thing to remember when working with people, and that's developing trust. This is easy to do if you have repeat users. They see you every workday. One bad day isn't going to stop them from trusting that you know what you're doing. But in a transactional user base, where the user only contacts the company once or twice, how you interact with each user each time is going to break or build that trust. Why is trust so important? Without it, the user could be difficult to work with and could even ignore your advice completely. Empathy and acknowledgement are a big part of building trust. Without these, you'll find it difficult to connect with the user. By seeing things from the user's perspective, you're more likely to find the solution that will help them specifically. This lets them know that you care, and they'll be more likely to be engaged in the interaction. It's also important to follow through on your commitments and promises. If you tell someone you're going to follow up in 1 hour, then be sure to make it happen. And if you don't, acknowledge the oversight and apologize. Be sure that any claims you make can be backed up. Don't make something up to a user because you think it'll help in the moment. Be honest with the user, even if you think they won't be happy about it. And never be afraid to admit when you're wrong. This might be the hardest thing to do with a user, but you'll find that your interactions are more successful this way. Being specific and empathetic with your apologies will give it more meaning. And remember, no one wakes up in the morning thinking, I'm gonna be a jerk today. While you shouldn't sacrifice your self-respect, do your best to give the user the benefit of the doubt whenever possible. Now that we've covered the main customer service techniques, we're going to dive into some of the nitty-gritty by looking at the anatomy of an interaction. These apply to any channel of IT support: email, phone, chat, or in-person interactions. From the first moment you interact with someone, it's important to think about how you say hello. Do you make sure to tell them your name? Do you incorporate information you know about them in your greeting? Do you ensure a positive tone? Are your spelling and grammar on point? These are all ways to create a really good start to the interaction. Some of these things are hard to achieve though. I'm a horrible speller, especially when I'm in a hurry. But knowing some of these trouble spots ahead of time will let you find ways to address them before the interaction. For me, I know that when I'm in a hurry, I need to recheck my spelling before hitting send. Have you ever heard the phrase, first impressions last a lifetime? Well, that might be a bit of an exaggeration. It touches on some truth. How you first interact with someone will influence how the rest of the interaction plays out. I'm not saying you have to be over the top, gushy, and nice. That might have the opposite effect. Just be professional, acknowledge the user, and show them some respect. Taking the time to get the interaction off to a good start will make everything that comes after easier. Let's check out 2 scenarios to see how this plays out.
Hi, Gail. How are you doing?
Not great. It's been a bad day trying to get my phone fixed.
Oh, what's wrong with your phone? Hi, Gail. How are you today?
Not great. It's been a bad day trying to get my phone fixed.
Oh, sorry to hear that. Let's see what we can do to turn that around.
Just by acknowledging their feelings and demonstrate your desire to help them, you've started to build a relationship with the user. Of course, you have to keep up the good work throughout the interaction, but laying the groundwork is an important first step. And remember that while you might have 100 issues in the ticket queue that need your attention, this is the only one that matters to the user. So show them it's your priority too. The next critical step in an interaction is how you respond to the user's questions. If they're taking the time to explain to you what happened, but you brush off their concerns by acting uninterested, things are going to go south fast. Remember to integrate the information you've been given into your conversation. This will show you're actively listening and can help them feel more connected to the interaction. Let's look at an example. Which one of these greetings do you think is the most effective? Greeting 1, hi Rory, how are you today? What can I help you with? Or greeting number 2, hi Rory, I hope you're having a good day despite your computer randomly turning off. Let's see what we can do to fix your issue. It's important to be transparent with the user. If they start asking you a bunch of questions while you're still troubleshooting, you can do 2 things. First option, you can ignore them because they're just talking out loud. Second option, you can pause and say something like, I'd be happy to answer all of your questions, but I want to look up this one first. I've written them all down though, so I won't forget them. If you say that, make sure to write the questions down. To really build a rapport, try to remember a personal fact they've mentioned and bring it up later. Maybe they mentioned they love cats. Later, while you're waiting for something to load, ask them if they have any cats or what their cat's name is. This shouldn't be forced, so if you're not the type to engage in small talk, skip it. Now you're getting to the point where you're ready to troubleshoot. Just make sure you clarify the person's issue before you start to troubleshoot. If you don't, you might find yourself going down a rabbit hole. Imagine that a user tells you their computer can't get online. So you look at the IP address, DNS configuration, and you start pinging things with no luck. Everything seems fine. Then, 20 minutes later, you find out their machine is online. They just can't access a particular page. Had you clarified this at the start, you would have saved yourself and the user 20 minutes. It seems simple to clarify the problem space, but but it's often overlooked. Take this example.
Thank you for calling. This is Leon. How can I help you?
Hi, Leon. My computer isn't working.
That doesn't sound fun. What do you mean by the computer isn't working?
It won't connect to the internet.
Do you have the corporate password for the Wi-Fi?
No, why do I need that?
In order to connect to the Wi-Fi in the building, you need to use the corporate password.
Well, I'm not in the building. I'm at a cafe.
That's odd. Your computer seems to be different than what we normally use. Can I get your name so I can look up your configuration?
Ling Chan?
Do you work at this company?
No, my friend gave me the number.
Problem solving is a super important aspect of an IT support interaction. Being an IT support specialist means that you could be asked about anything. Even though you aren't expected to know the answer off the top of your head, you should know where to start looking to find it. People are coming to you because they have a problem they can't fix themselves. Sometimes they feel self-conscious about asking for help, so be aware of how you probe for information. Pummeling the user with question after question will probably create frustration on both sides. Make sure to set context and explain why you're asking the question. Saying something simple like, "In order for me to figure out what's really going on, I need to ask you some question," can make all the difference. When you're in person, things are a lot easier because you can see each other and read each other's expressions, but you might find yourself too comfortable. Imagine you're asking for help with your phone. You wouldn't want the person helping you to just take it out of your hands without asking. So make sure you tell the user what you're doing before you do it. If you're supporting a user remotely and need them to run some commands, don't forget to tell them why you need them to execute the commands. There's no need to go into a ton of detail, but without some context, you could strain the trust you've built. Make sure that when you're asking these questions or asking the user to run a command, you're really listening to the response. Those little nuggets of information may help solve the issue. The last 5 minutes of the interaction will set the tone for how the user feels walking away from the interaction. So make sure to end on a positive note. You might have solved their issue, but if they don't feel it was resolved or they're unsure of the next steps, then they're going to walk away feeling like it was a poor solution. So how do you make a good final impression? Simple. Reiterate the resolution, state the next steps, then ask the user if they have any questions. If you've ever worked in customer service, then you've dealt with difficult situations. The way you handle them in the food industry and tech world are pretty similar. But before we dive into that, we're going to take a step back and talk about the science behind what's happening in these situations. Let's say someone's yelling at you. Whether it's about an overcooked steak or a broken computer, your reaction to either will probably be similar. Your palms might be sweating, your hands might shake, or your mouth goes dry. Tunnel vision might kick in. These are all normal physiological reactions that happen in response to a perceived threat. This is part of our biological makeup dating back to the time when people hunted for their food. When you're being chased by a cougar, you needed your senses to be at high alert in order to keep yourself alive. Even though someone yelling at you isn't the same as a cougar attacking you, it can feel similar in the moment. Your brain is releasing a mix of chemicals and hormones to heighten your senses and keep you alert. Unfortunately, a side effect is that you may have trouble focusing on a specific task. Not ideal. It's in times like these that you might go on autopilot, where your body has a physical reaction and it's hard to focus. It's super important to recognize these moments and put a plan in place to reboot yourself out of the situation. Sometimes I feel this way when I'm teaching a class and someone is ignoring me. They just don't pay attention. I used to call them out on it, the fight response, but this never ended well. Sometimes they had a good reason for being on their phone, and calling them out never made them listen more. Now, when I feel myself in that situation, I notice that my pulse increases. When I realize that's happening, I make sure to look around and focus on people who are more engaged in the lesson and make eye contact with them. Soon, I feel my pulse slow down. Some of your experiences in IT support might trigger similar reactions. Once you've identified this reboot action, write it down. Remember, your brain isn't always working well in the heat of the moment, so it helps to have something to remind you what to do. It could be anything from squeezing a stress ball to looking away to taking a deep breath. The first couple of times, it may not work, so give it time. When you have a difficult situation, take a moment to think about what went wrong. How are you feeling? What was your reaction? Why did you raise your voice? After a while, it becomes second nature to catch yourself and de-escalate the situation. To really hold yourself accountable, tell a coworker what you're trying to do. Give them a recap of the interaction and ask them for their feedback on the interaction. You might get some great tips. But here's the bad news. Things aren't over once you get yourself back on track. That's when the hard work starts. Every situation is different, and you'll learn the best strategies from experience and peer feedback. To get you started, I'll run through some tried and true techniques. Keep in mind that it's fine if you don't get these right the first time. It takes practice, reflection, and feedback to really nail it, so don't give up. The hardest and arguably the best technique is to identify where the interaction went wrong in the moment and redirect the conversation. This is really tough because it means remaining calm enough to objectively look at the interaction and understand what could have caused it to escalate. At first, try this once the interaction is over. You start your chat with the user, and it's really pleasant and problem solving is happening. Then suddenly the tone turns dark. What caused it? Where was the misstep? Looking back, you might notice that the user didn't understand the question about what happens when he tries to sync his phone. And the tech just kept repeating it. The user gets annoyed and then starts typing in all caps, a clear sign they're irritated. In this case, the cause seems obvious. If the user didn't understand the question, then they probably got frustrated when the same question was asked over and over. If the IT support specialist had noticed this, they could have reframed the question and broken it down further. Another cause of frustration in user support interactions is when people talk over each other. This usually happens over the phone, since there's sometimes a delay, but it can happen in person too. Typically, it leads to people talking louder and sometimes ends up feeling like you're yelling at each other. You've probably been in a situation like this with your friends or family. Everyone wants to talk, and the person with the loudest voice wins.
How can I help you today?
My laptop isn't working. I need a new one. I have meetings I need to go to.
I can certainly look into this and see what we can do to fix it. But I want to set context that our policy is to only replace laptops if all other options have been exhausted.
I don't need you to go snooping around my computer. Just give me a new one.
Gail, I'd love to do that for you, but
That's ridiculous. I'm a director. I should get a new one. I don't have time for this.
I completely understand the urgency of the situation. Why don't you let me take a look at
That's
it?
why I came. You need to fix it.
It's important to try and identify why this is happening so you can course correct. In this case, you can simply stop talking to calm things down. Then pause for about 5 or 10 seconds to make sure they're done talking and start again. This might take a few tries before the user realizes what they're doing and gives you time to talk. Use that time to calm down and really listen to what the user is saying. Ask yourself, why are they talking over me? What am I missing? Then in those 5 to 10 seconds, collect yourself and think about what you want to say.
How can I help you today?
My laptop isn't working. I need a new one. I have meetings I need to go to.
I can certainly look into this and see what we can do to fix it. But I want to set context that our policy is to only replace laptops if all other options have been exhausted.
I don't need you to go snooping around my computer. Just give me a new one.
Gail, I'd love to do that for you, but
That's ridiculous. I'm a director. I should be able to get a new laptop. I have no time for this.
I completely understand. Can you let me have 5 minutes to do a quick triage and then we can discuss next steps?
If a user is crossing a line and making you feel uncomfortable, ignoring it can feel like the easiest solution. It isn't. Remember that if you do, the next person they interact with will be treated the same way, and that's not okay. It's also easy to say that the person being attacked needs to stand up for themselves. But in situations like this one, that's really hard. Ideally, bystanders would call out this behavior in a calm way. It's also important that you escalate these issues to the appropriate channel, whether that's your manager, the human resources department, whomever. Disclaimer, I love being in the IT support field, and I don't want to dwell on the negative, but I do want to prepare you for what you might encounter. So let me throw another tough scenario at you. You might find that a user skims over what you wrote or doesn't listen to the full instructions you present before taking action. When this happens, be patient. You've likely been on the other end of this before when you ignored instructions. Why? Were you overwhelmed with the information? Were you in a hurry? Maybe you need reading glasses. Whatever the case might be, the best tactic is to break these steps down into smaller, more digestible pieces for the user. If you sent them an article that they didn't finish reading, ask where specifically in the documentation they're having issues so that you don't have to bore them with the parts they already know. Sometimes you'll come across someone wanting to bend a policy or push back on an established process. Take this as a sign to look deeper into the situation. Is it really a company policy or just a common way of doing things? If it is a policy, is there documentation of it? You can reference that to the user. If not, offer to follow up to get a definitive answer. You might be surprised what you find. The takeaway here is that it's important to try to see things from other people's point of view. In that moment, when you're feeling riled up and frustrated, take a minute to see the situation from the other person's perspective. If you were them, how would you be feeling? What would make you feel better? If you can train yourself to see things from another's perspective, you're on your way to turning things around. Have you ever worked hard on something that had a lot of steps and took a long time, only to have to do it again 3 months later and completely forgotten everything you did? Well, that happens all the time in the IT world. That's why it's important to document the work you do. Documentation might seem like a time suck, but it's a total time saver. There are 2 main ways we document information in the IT industry. The first is through a ticketing or bug system. Tickets are a common way of documenting an issue. Bugs are issues with the system that weren't caused by an external source. Imagine if every time something broke, you received an email. That'd be hard to keep track of and not scalable at all. The IT industry utilizes systems just to keep track of this for you. Some examples are Bugzilla, Jira, and Redmine. These are all-in-one solutions that help you track user issues, communicate with your users, and provide updates. A great way to use the system for documentation is to update the ticket with what the issue is, the steps and procedures you're trying to resolve, and the solution you arrived at. This is important for 2 reasons. The first is that it keeps the user in the loop. The second is that it helps you audit your steps in case you need to go back and see what you did. You can also write down procedures and policies to create a documentation trail. You have a lot of options of where you want to write and store your documentation. You can keep your policies and procedures in a document, web page, through online file storage, or lots of other mediums. Just make sure it's accessible to everyone else in your company. If you have a monthly reoccurring task, like updating old software on machines, make sure to write down all the steps and then refer back to them when it's needed. Documentation isn't a set it and forget it situation. Systems and processes are constantly changing, and so should your documentation. It's important to update documentation so that you aren't reading something that's old. One last thing I want to call out about writing documentation is that you don't need to get creative with your writing. You aren't writing a short story. You're writing a technical document. You want to be as concise as possible so that when someone reads your document, they can easily figure out what they need to do. Let's take a look at examples of good and not so good documentation. Here's the deal. You encounter a strange issue when helping a user out. This issue happens so often that you and your colleagues have encountered it. No documentation is the worst documentation. Imagine if it took you hours to figure out an issue to a problem and you didn't write it down. Your colleague encounters the same issue and takes hours to figure it out. Then he also doesn't write it down. This can go on and on. It only takes a little bit of effort to create documentation, and it can save you so much of your time, your company's time, and your users' time. Okay, this isn't the best example of documentation. The problem the IT support specialist stated isn't specific, and it leaves you with more questions than answers. And while it tells you what will fix an issue, it doesn't tell you how. Documentation should be straight and clear-cut. Your reader shouldn't have any questions when following the instructions you listed. Now, this is a good example of documentation. It starts off with a very specific and clear problem. It gives you background information on what the issue is. It even gives you the exact instructions on how to fix the issue, including which settings to navigate to and where. Remember, always write documentation that makes it easy for your reader to follow. Now that we've talked a little bit about documenting processes, let's talk about how you'll write documentation in ticketing or bug systems. You don't have to leave a full example of process documentation for every ticket you handle. If you encounter the same issue, just write the documentation once, then refer back to it. One of the more important aspects of writing documentation in a ticket or bug is that you leave an audit trail to see what worked and what didn't. Let's take a look at some examples of awesome documentation and not so awesome documentation in ticketing and bug systems. This isn't helpful at all, since we don't know what the issue was or what the IT support specialist did to fix it. If someone stumbled upon this ticket with the same issue, it would be pretty useless. This is an example of a great ticket documentation. The tech described what the issue is, what caused the issue, and the specific steps they took to resolve it.
Hi there, my name's Rob Clifton, and I'm a program manager at Google. My career in IT started about 17 years ago. At the time, my IT knowledge was mainly self-taught. I took certificate courses much like this one and learned as much as I could along the way while I continued to go to college part-time to get an associate's degree. Finding that first job wasn't easy. I had to convince someone to take a chance on me, even though I had no degree and no advanced education in IT. I applied for a lot of jobs, got a few interviews, received a lot of rejections, and eventually landed my first job fixing computers at a big box retailer. Over the next few years, I jumped around to different jobs, gaining more experience while I continued to go to school and finish my degree. I eventually landed at Google as a support tech in our Ann Arbor office. 12 years later, I now lead the hiring efforts for our junior IT support roles. I've interviewed hundreds of candidates, and I help train our interviewers on how to find the best talent in the industry. Today, I'm excited to share what I've learned to help you prepare for your next interview. Going into an interview is a moment that lots of people dread. We're all afraid that we could say something wrong, that we're not ready for that next step, or just that we'll be rejected. These are all normal feelings, but it helps to look at the interview as an opportunity. It's an opportunity for you to hone your interpersonal skills, learn more about the company, and make sure that the job is a good fit for you. It's an opportunity to advance your career and gain more work experience. During these lessons, we'll give you some tips that'll help you prepare for the interview. We want you to walk into your interviews feeling confident and excited. In later courses, we'll also add a few role-playing exercises where we'll show you what a technical interview on the subject at hand may look like. To land an interview for a job you want, make sure your resume and online professional presence are in order. This will help you stand out from the other applicants when you apply. Your resume is your first introduction to a new company. Make sure your resume is easy to read and clearly shows the recruiter or hiring manager that you're a strong fit for the job you're applying for. Avoid using lots of filler text in your resume. If you're new to the industry, you may not have a lot to put on your resume, but that's okay. You don't need to list out every piece of software you've used or networking protocol you've ever learned about. Stick to your relevant qualifications. Use a standard resume template and be consistent with your formatting and structure. Proofread your resume and have someone else review it too. You don't want grammar and spelling errors to be your first impression with a potential employer. There's a lot more to say about resumes, so I've included more material in the supplemental reading. You should also make sure you have an up-to-date online presence. Your profile should look professional and have the most current resume, a photo, and updated contact info. Don't forget to do this. Employers are using sites like LinkedIn more and more to reach out to candidates. Now, when you find a job that you want to apply for, you want to learn as much as you can about the role. First place to find this information is in the job description. The description will usually include the role's responsibilities and requirements and some information about the company. Take some time to understand those details and make sure it's a good fit for you. Feel free to ask your recruiter any additional questions you have about the role or the company. Knowing these expectations and requirements will also help you prepare for the interview. For any IT role, make sure that you know the fundamentals of IT really well and spend extra time reviewing any specific areas that are called out in the job description. This program will get you started with some of those fundamentals, like networking and operating systems, but you'll still need to do some research on your own. On top of the specific job requirements, you should also take time to research the company that you're applying to. Learn about the main characteristics of the company, what their primary products or services are, who their customers are, and where they're located. Look for things that are new, interesting, and exciting about the company's future. Try to learn about some of the challenges the company might be facing. If the company has a code of conduct or mission statement online, make sure to read it, as it'll illustrate what the company prioritizes. Knowing the company's values will help you decide whether it's a company you want to work for. Some of these facts may come up during your interview, either as part of a scenario or in a question by itself, so you'll want to be prepared. Lastly, once you have an interview scheduled, make sure you know where to go, when you need to be there, and what the appropriate attire is for the interview. This particular tip was especially important for me when I first interviewed with Google. At the time, Google was in a temporary space above a restaurant in Ann Arbor, a town I was not very familiar with. There was no sign or address, so when I got there, I had no idea where to go. Thankfully, I arrived with some time to spare, so when I got to the right block for the address, I went around to the back alley, found the address on the fire escape, and climbed it to the second floor. The door was open, and the woman behind it was a little surprised to see me entering. Everyone had a bit of a laugh when I told them I couldn't find the front entrance, and I didn't want to be late for my interview. To this day, my manager still talks about my entrance and says it showed him I was resourceful and determined. Who knows? Maybe that's why they decided to give me the job. A lot of us are quite nervous when we go through our first interviews. There are a lot of things at stake, and it might be hard not to freak out. But don't panic. You can do this if you prepare. With interviews, as with lots of other things in life, practice makes perfect. In order to get this practice, try doing mock interviews. Pretending that you're in an interview, even if it's not real, will help you perform your best. You'll be more comfortable thinking out loud and providing clear answers to complicated questions. To do these mock interviews, recruit a friend or family member that's willing to practice with you. Even if they don't know the actual content, they can still help you get into interview mode. By practicing, you'll get used to articulating yourself clearly, which is key to nailing an interview. It's not just about knowing the answers. You also need to share your ideas clearly and concisely. For example, take some general technical subjects like DHCP, DNS, Active Directory, or any other technical area you've learned about. Have a friend or family member ask you to explain the concept to them. What's it for? How's it used? Practicing explanations for a non-technical audience will get you used to breaking down complicated ideas and sharing them in basic terms. They can also create their own troubleshooting scenarios, like asking you to explain what you did the last time you fixed their printer or got their network online. While you're practicing answering questions, you should also practice active listening habits. Maintain eye contact with the other person, nod in understanding when they speak, and ask relevant follow-up questions. If you can, it's great to practice with someone who also plans to interview for similar roles. This way, you can take turns being the interviewer and the interviewee. This will allow you to put yourself in the interviewer's shoes and understand how best to answer each question. Now keep in mind, I don't recommend trying to script or memorize all of your answers. Instead, try explaining the same concepts in different ways. This allows for a more natural conversation and will help you adapt your answers in the actual interview where you won't know the questions. What you can write down and memorize is your elevator pitch. An elevator pitch is a short summary of who you are and what kind of career you're looking for. Make sure to include information like what you're passionate about, how you would like to grow, and what you're looking for in a new role. Practice delivering this pitch to different people and see how it sounds. Even if you have it memorized, stay flexible. You never know in which context you may need it. Creating your first elevator pitch from scratch can be hard. I've included a few examples in the next supplemental reading. When developing your own, make sure that you keep it personal. Again, the key to getting interviews right is to practice, practice, practice. This will help you feel less nervous and show your best self during the actual interviews. When you're interviewing for a technical position, you'll likely have one or more interviews where you'll specifically need to demonstrate your technical skills and knowledge. These interviews may take the form of technical troubleshooting scenarios or explanations of technical concepts and subjects. As we've said, you'll want to have a solid foundation for all the fundamental concepts. Different courses in this program will help introduce you to a variety of concepts related to networking, operating systems, system administration, and security. A good interviewer will push you to the limits of your knowledge. This means it's very likely that during an interview you'll reach a point where you're not sure you know the right answer. This is expected, but you shouldn't just say, "I don't know." If you were supporting a user, you wouldn't say it then either. It's okay to admit you're not sure, but you should then explain what you would do to find the answer. As an IT support specialist, you should expect to often face new and unfamiliar problems. Having a good problem-solving strategy is more important than knowing all the answers. If the question you're answering is big and complex, outline how you would break down the work needed to solve the problem before going into the exact details of what needs to be done. If you're thinking about what the best solution could be, share your train of thought with your interviewer so they can follow along. Thinking aloud not only helps the interviewer see your thought process, but it also helps you work through the problem. For example, if you get stuck with a technical troubleshooting scenario, you can try to recap what information you've gathered and state potential causes that can be ruled out with certainty, and then try to figure out what info is still missing to rule out other causes. When you mention concepts or technologies, you should be ready to explain them and articulate why you may choose one thing over another. For instance, if you're working through a networking problem and say something like, "The problem might be related to the DNS settings," be ready to explain what DNS is and why it relates to the issue. You should also clarify the question's constraints. Don't assume anything. It's okay and even expected to ask the interviewer follow-up questions to ensure that the problem is correctly framed. Always use the data and evidence you have from the interviewer to inform your next steps. For example, if you need to solve a problem about a user being unable to connect to an internal system, you should ask follow-up questions like what operating system the user is using, how the computer is supposed to connect to the network, what kind of error messages they're getting, whether other users are affected. Your goal is to narrow the scope to find the root cause. If the question is very complex, it might become difficult to follow or explain the solution. In this case, it's useful to take notes and use diagrams to illustrate the problem. You can use this process when it makes sense. It doesn't mean you need to write everything down during an interview. Sometimes the answer is straightforward and you can just go ahead and explain it without writing anything down. Being your best self at the interview starts the night before. Being fully rested will help you have more energy, be more focused, and minimize anxiety. So make sure that you get a good night's sleep. Don't try to cram in any last-minute studying. This will only make you more anxious. Instead, try to relax and go to bed early. On the day of the interview, eat a proper breakfast. It's never a good idea to be hungry during an interview. Aim to arrive earlier than the scheduled time and give yourself enough travel time for any mishaps along the way. Make sure you're comfortable before you begin the actual interview. Don't be afraid to ask for something if you need it. Use the restroom, grab a glass of water, and ask for a notepad and pen for notes or to illustrate answers when necessary. Be fully present for the duration of the interview. This means turning off your phone to avoid interruptions and giving the interviewer your full attention. Use those active listening skills that you've practiced. Make eye contact, nod to indicate understanding, and ask follow-up questions. Don't forget to be yourself. You want the interviewer to remember you, so let your personality show. Make sure that you highlight what makes you unique. Remember that the interview is also an opportunity for you to ask questions about the things that you care about. You're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. Find out if this is a company that you want to work for and whether you'll be able to achieve your career goals there. Finally, remember to slow down. Most people start talking faster and faster when they're nervous, so be aware of your pace. If you notice that you're getting nervous, pause for a moment to take a few deep breaths and then consciously slow down. Whoa, that's a lot of tips to remember. Feel free to rewatch these videos when your next interview is approaching to make sure that you have these ideas fresh in your mind. Next up, together with Candace, a colleague of mine, we'll do the first of our role-playing exercises showing some of these tips in action. Hi, thanks for coming in. Before I jump into my technical questions, I'd like to know a bit more about you. Tell me why you're interested in this position.
When I came into college, I was a pre-med major, and eventually I led down the path to take an Introduction to IT course. After that course, I realized how impactful IT was, and I became more curious to how computers work and why do they break. So I changed my major to IT after that class. After 2 years of being in the major, I got a job at the IT Service Center where I was able to help students with their computer issues. So I believe having this job will allow me to advance my knowledge and troubleshooting skills, and then also I'll be able to learn new things.
Cool. Can you tell me what in particular you find appealing about IT?
I like IT because it allows me to be very creative, and then also allows me to hone in on those problem-solving skills. I also like IT because it's very broad, so I feel like the trajectory of my career could be in multiple IT fields, such as database management, software engineering, IT support, and networking.
That's awesome. All right, well, let's get started with our first question then. Let's say that you're the only person supporting a help desk and you're currently helping me with an issue when a VP walks in and they ask you for help and they say they have a presentation to give in 15 minutes. How would you handle this situation?
So I want to prioritize the issues based on severity. It seems like the VP issue is a little bit more time sensitive, so I would ask you if it's okay if I would help out the VP.
Okay, that's fair. I'm okay with that. Now, how would you help the VP?
So I would want to get the VP up and running as soon as possible. So I will offer them a spare laptop, and then in the meantime, I'll be able to fix their computer while they're at their meeting.
Okay, great. So now let me rewind for a second. Let me change things up. So what if you were helping me and my issue was actually very critical and it was part of a larger issue that was affecting a number of users? Say maybe our wireless network was having issues. How would you handle that?
So if I was able to help the VP right away, by offering a spare laptop, then I would do that. But if that's not the case, then I have to let the VP know that the issue that I'm dealing with is a little bit more severe because it affects the business. And I would hope the VP will be a little bit more understanding. And I would probably have to have a coworker come on and help the VP, or I could tell the VP to probably reschedule their meeting if that's possible.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think that's fair. And you're right. We should take into account what's most important to the business in that type of scenario. So good job. So in this scenario, we saw Candace deliver her elevator pitch and show why she's passionate about IT and becoming an IT support specialist. We also saw one typical complication of troubleshooting problems: getting priorities right. Time-sensitive issues usually have higher priority, but issues that are preventing a large number of users from getting work done should be dealt with first, even if the person asking for help is a director or a VP. That's it for now. See you again at the end of the next course.